All right. All right. So one more time, and there we go. So it's kind of that light time of year in terms of news and events. Couple things to share. One of them is kind of in progress. We talked about it last month, but you still have time to sign up for this. This is the Page Builder Summit. It's free. Again, it's still going on for a couple more days. Really a wide variety of speakers. So even if you're not using a page builder, like kind of the classic page builders like Divi or Elementor, I think there's still a lot of topics that are worth listening to. And again, price is great. It's free. So you don't have to watch these live. In fact, I don't think they're doing any of them live. You can just go back to the recordings afterwards. And the recordings are available for a limited amount of time. So definitely don't sleep on it. If you want to watch some of these sessions, now is the time. Afterwards, I think it goes to kind of a paid tier of people registered. So that's pagebuildersummit.com. Another one too, again, if you're lucky enough to actually travel to WordCamp Europe, it's in a beautiful place, Turin, aka Torino, Italy, which I've been to. It's gorgeous. But even if you can't attend, the nice thing is all of their presentations, even from past ones too, you can search for WordCamp Europe 2023, 2022, etc. It's generally a little bit after the conference ends. You can take a look at their presentations they posted to YouTube. So this is one more just to be aware of. Or again, like I said, if you're in the neighborhood, go to WordCamp, then go check out Turin as well. So that's all I really had for news and events. Peter, any other ones that have crossed your path? You're more in the know on the events than I.
Yeah. I put a link into the events.wordpress.org link to WordCamps. There are a few in the US, in fact, in our area, not that I actually travel to them.
The New Jersey one is coming up, I think.
Yeah, New Jersey, yeah, it's definitely one. It's an investment to go, and it's interesting. There's been some conversations about that, about the fact that it's an investment. It's not just the ticket, unless you're local. If you're traveling, it's travel and accommodations and food and all those things. So
worth checking out, though. I've only been to WordCamp New York City a long time ago, pre-COVID, and in fact, I don't know if they've done it since. At least I've been looking for it again, but I haven't seen it in a while.
The one and only WordCamp I went to was in 2014, and it was in Stanford, which
wow.
That was the only one that they had. So that was definitely a long time ago.
Don't be expecting a WordCamp Hartford anytime soon. Sorry, folks. It's a lot of work.
Although a friend of the show, or somebody that I go to his, a guy named Rick, who is in Ottawa. He's one of the there's the Ottawa WordCamp, or the WordCamp Canada. And I look what it takes to put those on. Yeah. It's an incredibly huge amount of work. I hate to say it, but I couldn't even see taking on that responsibility.
I agree. Maybe New England, someday they'll do a New England one.
Yeah. So and the last thing I'll just put the link to is it's coming up in the fall, but it is the accessibility, the WordPress Accessibility Day. Right. October 9th and 10th. It's 24 hours of live presentations, and they are live. I'm part of the planning on it, and I'll put in for a talk. We'll see. But anyway, it's definitely something to put on the calendar. It's great. I'll probably talk about it a few minutes before.
So keep mentioning that too as it gets a bit closer. Yeah. And also to put you on the spotlight, a tool or plugin spotlight. You got anything for this month?
Yeah, let me grab the screen here.
Sure.
Some of you might have seen this. I'll show you. Oh, first of all, one quick thing under WordPress.org, under Extend and Plugins, there's been a redesign. We may have talked about it last time. But something that, while I do believe that I saw a little bit of improvement here in terms of the search, it's still not great. Talking about AI, we were kind of talking about it before. There's a website called plugins.com. I know some people have been exposed to, use this, but I use it. What plugins.com is, it's a WordPress plugin repository with a layer of AI on it to help you with the searching, and the output is great. So say you wanted to look at something like query loop under plugins, you'll get a number of plugins that are associated with it. And what's kind of nice about it is you can see the layout. You can get a quick view of everything just right in your results screen, which is pretty jazzy. I'm just mousing over it. But where it's also where I use it is, I'll show you an example of something that's kind of interesting to me. So if I were to look up the plugin Generate Blocks, which is a very good plugin, that's the name of the plugin, Generate Blocks. But the way the search works on .org, it doesn't see that. It sees, if I did the search for what the actual name is, which is no space, Generate Blocks, I can now see it. But it's like pages down without, if I put in the space. And a lot of people don't necessarily know that there isn't any space. But in plugins, if I put in Generate Blocks, it's smart enough to know, oh, you must mean this. So I've been going more and more to this when I'm looking for something, and I want, my top results to actually match. There's some really interesting things you do to search, and you're like, why are you? These have nothing to do.
Peter, do you know, does it include paid plugins in this search too, or is it just the ones in the repository?
This is just repository. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So unless it's a freemium model that has a free version, at least that's what I understand and what I've seen, because you can see the results are pulling from, it's basically a scrape of the repository with a layer of
search.
Yeah, with a layer of AI search to it. So yeah, and getting a nice thing, and then link to the test and playground if you want to do it. I think we're going to do over the summer break, I want to do something specifically on playground and blueprints and things like that, because it's really intriguing me kind of stuff. But just right from there, if I go launch a playground instance, it's loading Generate Blocks, which does happen on the repository in some cases. But bottom line is this is a great way of searching the repository through a better search engine.
Very neat. I like the name. Very neat. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, I will put the link in.
All right, let me grab the screen. Let's see. Plugins.com. Oops. No screen. I hate the Zoom window. Ugh. I never put it in the right spot. Let me refresh just to make sure I'm getting the latest copy. The last minute changes. So again, welcome everyone. Our main topic for today is understanding the query loop block. And for folks who may, just a real quick background too, if you go back to our YouTube channel, some of the, was I think last year, we were doing a series of presentations, really exploring all the kind of the core blocks that are in the WordPress block editor. So we've covered text blocks, we covered media blocks, but now we're getting to some of the meatier ones that really deserve, we really think, their own presentation. So like the query loop block is one of those. There's some other ones we hope to do either later this year or in the near future that also get into more of the structure, like the rows and things like that. So anyway, tonight's topic is like I said, kind of a special case one, because there's really a lot to talk about here in the query loop block. So our agenda, we'll do some quick introductions of Peter and myself. Who are we? We'll also cover, before we talk about the block, just so people kind of understand it, we'll talk a little bit more generally about what is the query loop, aka the loop. So we'll talk a little code there, don't be afraid. And then I'll also mention, like, so how did you use, or how did you do this prior to having the block editor? Because I think it'll help put things into context a bit when Peter's doing the next section, which is using the query loop block and really the power of that block and what it's allowing people to do that previously was definitely much more difficult. And then I'll do a simple example, again, as we kind of have time, just talking about a use case for it, which is, creating a dedicated blog page. And I'll talk about what you kind of get out of the box with WordPress versus why you'd want to create maybe a dedicated blog / news page or whatever. And we'll talk about some alternatives to the query block, because it's WordPress. There's always alternatives to everything. And then we'll do some wrap up afterwards too, in Q&A, etc. Real quick, I'm Ray. I'm one of the Hartford WordPress co-organizers. I've been in software development, it's IT, whatever, for the past 25 plus years. Worked for some large corporations. Really started using WordPress on my own about 7-ish years ago. As I said, I'm self-employed right now after working in the corporate world. Married, no kids, live in Newington, Connecticut, close by to Hartford, and I am a geek. Peter.
I am Peter Ingersoll. I've been working on the web since the mid-90s. I use web technology for marketing communications. Came out of the newspaper industry, also logistics. I'm self-employed, married to adult kids, and I consider myself a WordPress DIY advocate. I definitely do my best to help those who are not developers but are running WordPress sites, like Ray does.
Yes. Cool. All right, so let's set some context here. So understanding the query loop block. It's good to understand where we came from. And again, WordPress has been around for a while. What was the anniversary? Was last year, right? We had the WordPress birthday stuff going on last year. So when we talk about the query loop block, first off, we just need to understand what is the query loop itself. So in the past, it was kind of also called the loop. So it really is the method that of how WordPress retrieves and displays, blog posts, pages, categories, tags, custom post types, and I'll show kind of what it looks like in a minute. But again, for folks who are really new to WordPress, all your data is saved in a database someplace. And the cool thing about WordPress is really a framework for accessing that data, and it's called a content management system. So you don't have to be a database expert. WordPress has created a bunch of functions and APIs and things that allow you to interact with that database. And one of those things that they provide you is the loop, or the query loop. So it's WordPress's method of accessing data from its database, specifically post pages, etc. So the query loop block is a newer, more user-friendly method of working with the loop by using the block editor. So again, if you're brand new to WordPress, you're probably only familiar with the block editor. It's kind of hard to think about. There probably are some people who've never seen that classic editor and all that. So that's good. So maybe the old stuff that we're going to show in a second, don't worry if your eyes glaze over, because it's hopefully something that people won't have to deal with too much anymore. But this will hopefully give you some context of why this particular block we're talking about tonight is so powerful. So before I jump into the how was it used, Peter, I don't know if you have anything to add to these two, feel free to chime in. No, all right, I'll keep going. So how is this, before we had the block editor, how did you interact with your pages and posts? Well, it was your theme. Again, you have to be familiar with either working with a theme or creating a child theme, but just understanding how themes worked. So the loop was kind of the nickname for it. It's really just code. It's PHP code, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But it's code that's used to display your posts, etc. So you had to have some level of comfort with maybe not necessarily being a PHP expert, but at least understanding how it worked. Because like any programming language, you have a bad comma or missing semicolon or something, and things can break. So in the past, it wasn't something that I think that most people would be very comfortable jumping into, unless you're willing to tinker or learn a little bit of PHP. So within this loop, though, what WordPress was doing is, first it retrieves, the blog post or custom post type, etc., and then it processes each of those posts in a loop. So let's say it's on a page, it'll take that post, your code will tell it how to format that, etc. And some of the ways you manipulate the data from the blog post is using these things called template tags, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. So really just a template tag is another piece of WordPress code, really in that framework that allows you to do or get something. So here's just an example of, this is literally a piece of code called the underscore permalink with 2 brackets. So that's like that's a function call which returns back and displays the permalink for whatever current post you're in the context of that you've retrieved. And it'll make hopefully more sense when I show it to you in the context of code. And then once you've retrieved something or called one of these template tags, then you can either insert HTML code or additional PHP code. It's like you're working with code at that point. This is all happening before a page displays to somebody on the front end. So the other thing is like, where does this all happen? In general, the loop, you'll see it at least in the themes index.php file or any other templates that are used to display post information. So that's where you would find this code. So let me show you. I'm not gonna really do a demo on, but I'll just kind of show you what the loop looks like. So again, we have some links to this as well too. This is in the old WordPress codex. You can read a lot more about the loop, but here's kind of a fairly simple example of what an index.php template looks like. So this, don't worry about this. This is just kind of saying, hey, I'm going to do some PHP here, but this is one of those templates I talked about, or this is just a function call, so get header. But this is the loop itself. So while this thing keeps executing, I'm sorry, this is the loop itself. So while this is true, these things are being executed in code. So let me just show you an example of this from, let's say, oh, here we go. So this is my demo site. I'm using the 2021 theme, just it's a non-block theme. And in this theme, if I go into the theme files here, and if I look at the index.php, here's the loop for this theme. So again, every theme is going to be coded slightly differently, but so while this is true, while there are posts to load, so again, if there's no posts, no blog posts on a brand new empty site, nothing's going to display. But while it's looping through, while this condition is true, so everything within these brackets, this is what it's going to do. It first gets context, so this is pulling data from the post, and then it does something. So what does that something look like? Sorry, let me move my window. Let me show you just one last example. And again, I swear I'll get away from code, but here's an even simpler. I'll make this bigger too. So here's a really, really simple test site I worked on years ago, back when I still had to code stuff in PHP. But in this example, this is really the front page of the site. And this is all that you really have. Here's a header, here's the header stuff, here's the footer stuff, but here's everything in the middle. So while there are posts, it was really formatting an HTML section or HTML div. And so this information, this is one of those templates I talked about, the site URL, the content, et cetera, all these little template things. Like, so how do you know what you can do in the loop? Well, fortunately, WordPress in this codex tells you all those things. So let's say that you wanted to, let's say you're looking at a blog post and you wanted to retrieve the author information. Well, this is where you'd use the this author tag. So get the author, the author meta, et cetera. So that's all the information that would that WordPress allows you to use. So give me one second here. So anyway, so that's what the loop used to look like. I mean, that's kind of, most people now, like I said, in general, don't do coding to that level, but you would have to be familiar with being able to do that kind of coding. So as I said, now things are a lot simpler. So let me just go back to this. All right, so this is going to switch now to you, Peter. So anyway, as I said, that old method really involved PHP. It really involved somebody getting familiar with, writing that code and working with the WordPress framework. So that's the demo piece. Let me pause this. Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing. And Peter, you can pick up your screen.
Yeah, I think what's important to note there is a big part of what we traditionally, when we're looking for themes or buying themes or finding them in the repository, it was things like coding the loop and how your blog post would look. That's what you were, relying on a coder to do for you, and now it's so much different, and it's so unnecessary, and honestly so much more easily done, which I'll share. We put this slide up all the time. The standing WordPress reminder: your experience is defined by your theme, your plugins, your custom code. WordPress environments can vary greatly, so what you're seeing may or may not work for you. I am going to swap between a few things, including even different themes to show you, but the concept of the query loop block works the same for for block themes as well as classic themes. And I'll be probably spending more time in the classic theme just because of what I'm used to and all. So, okay. So using the query loop block, all the query loop goodness, none of the code. So everything that Ray just showed you, all that scary stuff, don't have to worry about it, which is great. It's a powerful block used to display posts based on specified parameters. It can be used, this block can be used in many design and content variations. It can be placed on any page, including multiple loops on the same page. We're gonna, when we get to the end of the presentation, we're gonna kind of freeform do some of these things as people are asking about some of that stuff. So I'm going to go over just the query block itself, query loop block, but there's all the different ways of using it. You could use it in blog post pages, portfolios, testimonial sections, homepage featured areas, categories. It's all just how you get the data that is stored in your database as posts, presenting them on the page. Like I said, works in both block themes and classic themes, and it's not as scary as it sounds, and experimentation is encouraged. Even on a live site, you can go create a new page, start working on something and experiment. It's not going to break anything because you're not doing anything at the theme level. You're not playing with PHP code. You're setting up a block and you're using it. You can do this on the playground, the free WordPress place where you could just spin up a site. You can experiment all over the place, and I recommend that. The blocks we're gonna be using, theme blocks using the query loops, are in the theme area. So these are the blocks basically that you're going to be using, which one is the query loop block itself, post title, post featured image, post excerpt, post date, post author, categories, tags, things like that. There are a few others, avatar, all those types of things that can be used within a query loop block that are pulling data from your post. And then most other blocks, design blocks, can be put into the query loop block to further design what you're outputting on the page. So let's jump right into it. Let's go to I have got this site set up, and Ray, you'll get a kick out of this, and I should share this with you, which is having lots of posts pre-set up. Because it certainly helps with something like this. So I created a bunch of posts. Well, I didn't. They are AI generated. So this was a chat GPT exercise. So you'll see that everything follows sort of a certain style. But the idea is that by the images I grabbed, but by having this information, it's going to make our experimentation easier. It's harder to experiment with the query loop block if you don't have anything to query. One thing I will show you here that I think is kind of important to see is when we look at the types of things that you put into a post, and now I'm editing the post. When you're looking at, I'll go over here to page, and we're going to be playing in basically one page. Query loop block, and I've got some other pages in case we want to experiment a little bit more. But if I go to add a query loop block, and I was talking about the theme blocks. Well, this is again the title. I mean, it may seem obvious, but that's your post. That's pulling from the post title. The featured image, which is, and the order is kind of fun. The featured image here, the excerpts, again, those would be in your post over here where you have your featured image, your excerpt. It's pulling from the data that you're saving in a post from these types of fields. So they're named what they're supposed to be named. It makes a lot of sense. But in case you're wondering, where's it getting it? It's getting it from these areas of information, fields, if you will, when you save your data. So that's kind of important to know. So again, I have all of these posts. I've got titles, excerpts, categories, some tags, things like that. So we're gonna play with this information here. So the first thing I'm gonna do, and Ray, you'll let me know if there's any questions along the way.
Yep.
is check my notes. Yeah. So adding the block, the query loop block, it's right here. This is the query loop block, and you could just add it here. And I'm gonna not even go right into it right away, because I'm also going to show something that's kind of interesting, where if I go here and delete it, and if I were to go, you know, the kind of, if you knew that you wanted to do like a query loop block here, you could do it right from the inserter. And there's a lot of block patterns that are associated too. So if I did, I think it works here. Yeah, if I do just query, I get the query loop, but I also get the query loop patterns immediately available to me. So I can actually, even if you get used to this, you can skip a step. And what's nice in the new WordPress is it's actually pulling from my data. If you, when I show the posts over here, these are my featured images. My example here is saying, hey, do you want this one? It's showing me my data, which again is reducing the distance between what you want to put on your site and what it actually is going to be. And a lot of times things are more cryptic and placeholders for images, but we're getting closer and closer to making those things a lot easier. Right now, I'm not going to jump right into one of these patterns, but we're gonna experiment with that too. Again, plenty of experimentation going on. So there are two things that you start with in terms of when you add the query loop block, and one is to choose a pattern, which if I click on choose, I'm seeing those same patterns that I saw in that small box, right? So these patterns are predefined, packaged with the theme, quick ways of just saying, yeah, I like this, let me click on it. Once I do that, I now am immediately jumping into the query loop block filled with the data. Again, without getting into all the details, because there's a lot of overlay. If I go back to my list view here, we'll show you what's the elements of a query loop. What goes into the query loop block that will, and if I update this, let me go right to it and view the page. I'm going to show you the first thing that myself and almost everyone else runs into. Why didn't that work? Why am I not seeing what I want to see? And there's a very simple thing that you'll get used to, and you should kind of, there's an effort to make this, to change what the default is for the query loop block. I've actually added to it based on prepping for this presentation and for this meetup. And that is inherit query from template. On your query loop block, there is a setting here under settings that is inherit query from template. This is very handy if you're using the block theme editor, the full site editing function. You're setting up something like a category page where you want to have a category post look a certain way. You set that up as a template, and then you use the block in it. You're inheriting the query from that template. Most of the time, we're not going to be doing that. If you're using a classic theme, you're not going to be doing it at all. And even when you're using a block theme, you don't necessarily need to do it. And we will show you, both Ray and I will show you things about placing query loop blocks on certain types of pages. So the first thing to do right off the gate, turn off inherit query from template. And as soon as you do that, and we'll go through the different details, you will now see that there are a lot more things to choose in terms of what that query loop is. We'll go through them in a minute, but if I update that and now come back here and refresh this page, now I will see my posts here. I've done nothing but drop the query loop block in and picked one of the patterns. And this is showing me that content based on this block pattern. And each one of these posts that are being showed, which then would link to the full post, right? So now this is the post itself. On my query loop block, just like you would see in the blog page, it will have whatever elements I'm including in it: the title, the featured image, the excerpt, that type of thing, linking to it from that post. But I've done this just grabbing a pattern. Now, this section here, like if you take any one of these and see how this repeats, one of these posts is typically called a card. It could be called that a number of other things, but I'm hearing most commonly these referred to as cards. But what they really are is, when I look back at the page that I'm editing, it is within the query loop, you're going to have a post template. What that post template is the container for the blocks that will then output onto your page the way you want to do it. And we'll do a whole bunch of these, so you kind of get used to how these work. And when you go through them, they're just blocks like you would see in any kind of post. It's just these get repeated for as many of the posts that it finds that match the criteria. We'll get into the criteria in a second. But that post template is that repeating container that, in this particular case, in this pattern, there's 2 columns. The first column includes the featured image. The second includes the title and excerpt, again, pulling from that list of posts that you have, and based on any kind of criteria you have. So let's look at where that criteria is selected. The first thing is, again, when you enter the post, you have a few settings here to pay attention to. One that's very easy to miss, I missed it when I first doing it, is in kind of classic WordPress style, there are settings in more than one place. Query loop, if you're on the list view, or you select where you're on the query loop block, if you go to display settings, this is where you set how many items do you want to show. So how many, we'll call them blog post listings, but links to posts that would include titles, excerpts, featured image, whatever you want. So how many? And if we go back here, if I went through this, there will be 10 of those, because that's what I said. If I change this to 4 and updated that, then that query loop now is only going to show 4 items. So that's where you would set how many. Offset is when you start doing interesting things with design, which is like start at a certain number. So if I say, show me 4, but start at the first one, or in this case, 0 would be, start at the beginning. But maybe I have a second column where I say, show me another 4, but start at position 5. I had to think about that. So now you're showing 4 in one column, starting with your offsetting and starting the next one on at 5. Little complicated until you actually see it in action. And then maximum pages to show, when depending on which one you choose, like this particular query loop block actually isn't including the pagination. And I'll show you where you could put that in, but that pagination, you can set it to, like, if I have 30 posts and I say, well, I want to still limit to the total number to maybe my most recent 12, even if I have pages. So that's where you would set the total number of pages to show, which is different than the items per page. So again, there are very large blogs out there where you might want to say, I'm showing you 10 on a page, and the most number of pages I want to show you is 5. So, you're seeing my 50 posts that I want to present to you. Now, which posts are we presenting? Well, going back to the query loop, the default is your posts, your blog posts, if you will. You can pick pages. I'm not sure how I would use that, quite honestly, because of the way criteria works, but it's also custom post types. And for anyone who's been with us for a while, that we have we did a pet website. We created a custom post type in that demo. So that custom post type is also visible by the query loop block, and I can show the pets here. Actually, if I click on this, and it's looking for it, and now it's finding, I didn't have featured images set here, but it's finding, oh, I did. Okay, I had to just load. I'm not on the fastest server right now. So all it's doing is now selecting the custom post type, so that the query that's being used in this query loop block is filtering the data to the pet. But let's go to the post and let's look at even different things. But I'm gonna change something right now. I'm gonna replace this And this is destructive. So you want to be aware, you might want to save a page if you're doing still some experimentation and you want to go back to a save version. But I could go to replace, and then I could pick a different post type that might be more interesting. Now let me pick, I'm going to pick this grid one here, and I'll show you why. It's like, okay, that's interesting, but it's missing some things. Let's jump right into what we might want to do. So I'm going to query loop, my post template. In this case, I don't have columns, right? It's using this query loop is using a grid layout, and in there I have a group, I have the title, an excerpt, and a date. Now, this is where kind of the magic comes in, where it's like, well, you know what I want to do is I want to add the featured image, which isn't right now in this pattern. I can edit. Once I place the pattern, I can edit and I can place the featured image in this. Now I'm editing only the first one, and then it's showing me all of the other information. So this card where I just put that featured image. Now, if I go back to my list view, you'll see my group has a featured image, the title, the excerpt, and the date that's at the bottom. Now, if I update this, I've completely changed this now to use, let's load that, to use that layout. You might not like that layout, but the fact is that it's there to be used. And then you can start working on those pieces of information that are in there. You know, you might look at the title and go, well, let me change the style of the title. I think the text is too big and I want to go to a medium text or set the exact text. You could do that. You can go to the featured image and you can say, let me check. So again, just like you would use on any page or post, we're using the block editor. Let me highlight, I'm on the featured image. Let me go over to the featured image settings. You could set overlays and duotones and all those types of things. But one thing I am going to do is, if you notice, these images are different sizes. I can change the aspect ratio so that they all use the same aspect ratio. Maybe I can experiment. Do I want them all square, or do I want them in the 4:3, which could work? So you can set the different ways that featured image looks, just like you would placing any image on a post, where you can set. But what's nice is, again, that'll stay consistent. So now again, if I update that, I come over here, and it might be a subtle difference, but this one's longer than that. Let me refresh. And now it's the smaller font for the title, but all the images are the same height. Let's go back here and say, I go, okay, hey, this is great. And you're experimenting, you go, oh, I want to click on this, but it's nothing. How come I can't click on that? I can click on the title and that'll go to your post. But a lot of times I just want to click on the image. Well, as you might expect, if you go to the featured image, look at the block and look at the settings, there's a simple on-off link to post. You turn that on, update that. And again, you used to have to do this in code. Now, let me just refresh this. And now these are live links, because I've changed that parameter for that link, which is a very handy thing to do. But you might say, I want my title above the image. Well, you can do that. You can pick up the title and put it above the image, and you can see in the editor, it shows you everything. You might say, do I want the date there? Or maybe I want the date right up top, and I want to look at this date, and I want to change. Let me go over to styles and make that just small text. Update that. And now we'll see on this page, title at the top, image below it, small date above the excerpt. Here's another thing to look at, which is when you have the excerpt, you can actually add a block. This is kind of an interesting thing, right? I can go to a block and I can go to my my themes blocks, and you can actually put in, forgive me, I use the word actually a lot. You can put in the where is it? Read more. Well, let me search for it. Read more. And if I go to the read more block and I drop it in here, I can add that, and now I have a read more button. There's issues with this, and I haven't looked exactly into the details, where this isn't great for accessibility, because if somebody was using a screen reader, then they have links that say read more, read more, read more, without we'd want to code this a little bit differently for it. But you don't have to use this this read more block. You certainly can, and by default it says, okay, I'm part of this post, read more, open that post. When I click on it, I'm going to remove that.
Can you, Peter, before you remove it, there was, oops, I'll put it back, Control Z. There was a quick question about the read more block. Like, what kind of styling do you have on that? Can you change like the text size and so it looks like the usual
size, margin. Yeah, you can make it look kind of like a button if you put a background on it and put some padding around it. So you can certainly do a whole lot of damage over here. I want all my read mores to be red with white text, with, not that I do, but yes, you can certainly style the read more, and that's where you have a kind of a lot more flexibility. But your other option is in your excerpt, you have an automatic add read more link text, which you'll see it, and unless you put something there, it won't appear. Again, I'm over here in the front. I don't, that read more is the one I put in. Let me update this and you'll get the scary red one. Read more. We don't like that one. But if I say more info here, not a good link to use either. Which and this is text within the excerpt block. But if I update that, I will now actually see two read more. I'll see the more info here and the read more. So this is where, again, now if I go to the read more block, I don't need it. So I'm just going to delete it, because the excerpt block actually has a read more function built into it. But this whole idea about, okay, well, the styling and graphics, if I wanted to put, I'm not sure why I would want this, but say I wanted to go and put a separator between the bottom of the excerpt, or the date. Oh, I put it in the wrong place. Not there. Delete that. Let me go here to my post template, my group. I should be able to say add after, say a paragraph, and now if I want to do a separator, this is where you can style your output kind of any way you want. It's kind of wonky, right? The date is there and all, and you could play with that if that was something you actually wanted. But the point being that you could put in design elements. You could put in a paragraph that says, be sure to click the read more link, or not that, again, not that you want to, but the idea is you're just putting blocks into this post template block, which is within the query loop. And then this is where you get the ability to change the layout. Maybe I want to move the date to the top. Maybe I want to, another thing I'm going to add under the theme blocks is to add, again, instead of searching for it, just put in categories. And there is a category block. And you could actually, you have variable text, prefix and suffix. You could say the word category : and then have the category. I don't necessarily need that if I update this. Now the things we changed were moving the date and moving and adding categories. If I refresh here, then there's the date, my category, which will now actually click to an archive page. And this is, again, an interesting thing. Unless you set up something differently, this archive page is now defined by the theme. In a classic theme, your blog posts and your archives are typically defined by the theme. I'm using Cadence here, and in Cadence, you actually, without getting too distracted, you would go into customize, and then post page layout, and then archive layout. And then from there, you could say, you can make your changes. This is to the classic theme archive layout. Block themes do that also. But you'll note that that is different than what we're doing here with the query block layout. So let me get out of that. Another thing, when we go to the query loop, is or the post template. And this is something that kind of can throw people off a little bit, which is the fact that putting something in a grid or showing something as a list is a top level tool of the post template. So this pattern uses a grid, right? So this is highlighted, this grid here. I'm at the post template block. If I change it to list, it's going to immediately jump to everything that I had in that post template card, but instead of now showing it in a grid, it's showing it as just a list of them. So there's one on top of each other. So if I update that and I go back to,
basically like a single column, right? So
it's like a single column.
Yeah,
Exactly.
multiple columns.
It's literally just stacking them on top of each other. And you say, oh, maybe you want that, and there's definitely patterns that they don't use a grid. It's just literally stacking things on top of each other. Or maybe you're putting something in a column and in a column with other content, and you don't need to put things in a grid. But then I could still go back to my grid. It's here. But now when you are the grid, one of the options that you have is how many columns do you want? You can change it to say, 2 columns is probably a little bit more aesthetically pleasing here. And that was under post template if I'm using a grid and setting the columns to 2. And also under post template, let's look at so our options under like say background. Maybe you wanted to have a light gray background behind your post templates or something. You can set all these factors.
Are you sure, Peter, sorry to interrupt, but just from a styling, to give you a second to breathe too, from a styling standpoint, you kind of showed this already, but like, for example, that featured image, if you change that, let's say, to be rounded corners or the styling, it's going to apply that to everything within that loop.
Yeah. Featured image. Set the rounded corners to that. Update that. Everything in that card that gets repeated, right? Last time I updated it was a list. Now I'm back to a grid, but only 2 wide, and my featured image now has rounded edges. So yeah, exactly. You're editing everything in this first block, which is your post template. It's being repeated for as many things as it finds. And there you go. Now, before I get rid of that, let me show you something here. If I wanted to, under this query loop, let me put a add after, because I'll just get rid of it. Because I wanted to make sure to show this, which is, I'm going to add another query loop, add after, /query loop. And this time, instead of choosing from a pattern, I'm going to start blank. They both work, and they both work the same. When you hit start blank, you're given these 4 variations, and it's just starting points: title and date, title and excerpt, title, date and excerpt, image, date, and title. It's just saying, okay, we're going to put those things into a post template. That post template block, and then you can start moving them around anywhere you want, as opposed to pick an existing pattern and then either like it or change it or whatever. But say I went with the image, date, and title. That's all it is, right? So that query loop, I just added a post template that has the featured image, the date, and the title, exactly what it would say. Now I might say, okay, that's good, but now I want to go back to my query loop, and I want to go to my settings, items per page, per out might be 6. Let me go to my post template, make this a grid, and so on. It's now you're going through those same things, but it might be easier to, depending on what your experience is, to start with a more generic instead of a preformed pattern. There's no right or wrong, and if you put in a pattern, you can change it all you want, just like if you start from one of the blank layouts. But you can see it's just going to total default, what these fonts are and all, and you would go back through the same exercise, link to post if that's what you want to do, which you typically want to do. Set that featured image to a aspect, some standard at maybe 9:16. Oh, that's 16, but yeah, that's portrait. Again, you have all these 16:9, a little bit thinner, and so on. And you can, go to your title and change, make that a link, because out of the default, you just have to say, yes, I want to make that a link. Colors, backgrounds, all those same types of things. So that's just 2 different ways to start. One is from an existing pattern, and some themes when you load will give you additional patterns for your query loops. So you might say, there's kind of the default ones that are part of WordPress, and then you might get a specific, and if we've got time, we can experiment with that later, where you have a theme and now go to add a query loop and make sure that, and all of a sudden now you have a couple other patterns that are built, or you can save your pattern. If I copy this query loop, I could put it on another page, or I can do anything with it like that I can do with any number of any other types of patterns. Ray, I'm going to check my note. I have notes here.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry, I'm just answering. So Sherry and Ted actually had a question about excerpts, saying, if they don't, sounds like they don't necessarily create excerpts for their blog pages, and should they? I guess it depends. Meaning, if you're going to create a archive page or blog page that leverages them, then yes. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think if you don't have an excerpt, depending how your archive page works, doesn't it automatically grab some of the first characters or something anyway?
Exactly. So for that excerpt block, it will take whatever you put into the excerpt field. So if I look over at this post here and edit it, I've put in, actually you can see too in my admin listing, but this is what I put in the excerpt. Right? So I put that content in. If you didn't put that content in, the excerpt block will take X number of words from the top of your blog post.
Right. So adding one just gives you that ability to summarize it yourself rather than letting it just auto.
It's better for a whole lot of reasons. You literally can give it these are all summaries of what's in the post as opposed to just the words, especially if you have posts that start off with, like in this case, it would work, right? Lady Fern is a versatile and elegant fern that enhances, and you'll get like that many characters automatic, and that might be all that you need versus again going to the post where elegant fern that thrives, that's summarizing the whole thing. And yes, AI, the Chat GPT did help me put these things together, but you have control over it. And for search engine optimization, not that matters nearly as much as it did now that everything is a Reddit and Quora result. That's my latest search engine optimization pet peeve. But I always recommend excerpt. It looks cleaner. It helps people go, okay, the article's about this. And especially if you start off with, hey, we spent a lot of time in the garden and we found out some really neat things. And if that was your excerpt without talking about what those neat things are, somebody might not, and it might be even less information. So I always, as a matter of habit, put in an excerpt so that I can use in things like like query loops and things like that. So yes, I'm an excerpt. I'm pro excerpt.
And another one didn't come up in the chat, but I'm not sure if you're going to cover this later, Peter, but just, I think you touched upon this too, but so those patterns for your post template, I
Yeah.
believe you mentioned, obviously, there's the ones that come like with core, but then in terms of creating them, or where else do you get them from? I think you had said this too. I believe it's from your theme, right? Your theme
Yeah.
your theme
Yeah.
can include its own patterns, right?
I've certainly seen themes that come with their own patterns, especially block themes, because the query loop block is from the block theme world, more than the classic themes, which have that query loop defined in those PHP files, Ray, that you showed earlier. So I have seen certainly block themes where the theme author created their own additional patterns. I mean, we can, again, now or later, we can experiment.
Yeah. And then one other question that came up was around, you were obviously talking about custom post types and using like a cats or a pets one, but somebody asked earlier about custom fields too. Like, I think this is a trickier one. Like, is there a way in your group there? Is there a way to include, let's say, your custom post type also had a custom field, or your blog post had a custom field? Is there a way to easily include that custom field here? I think the answer is no, not easily yet, but just your thought.
Not I've not found it yet easily in core, but in a lot of other tools, or even if your custom post type was done through ACF, you have the short codes, for example, you can certainly put that in. So if you have a field that is specific, let's see if we still have.
And eventually, I assume that custom binding feature, which is kind of dropped out of that last version of WordPress, that may address it too from core.
Right.
Although that's more, yeah, that's not ACF custom fields, it's just regular custom fields.
Yeah, exactly. I was looking for, I'm not sure if I still have, if I kept it in here, which is the different pets. Oh, it was under the pets.
Yeah. Because we did it, because this question earlier, so we used when we were building the site, we used ACF and we added like age and breed and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And when we were outputting it, we were using this as a ACF shortcode.
Right.
So yes, you could certainly use the same type of thing, and I think all of the custom post type field tools have shortcodes, or what they actually are seeing more and more now is blocks, right? That allow you to pick a field. So if I was using Toolset, for example, which has their own blocks, I could pick, the custom post type field block and select what field I want to show on that. So the answer is yes, it's getting easier. I don't know it as part of core, other than, put in a paragraph block and put in a short code block and put in what the short code is for that value. And it'll work just as easy. If you just went to here, went to the inserter, put in short code.
Just under code, I think now, isn't it? I think it's just code.
Yeah, I think you're right. Plus, I also turned off some of the blocks because I was tired of seeing all the embed blocks, things like that I wasn't using. But say you had something that you wanted here, you could then put in your code or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or HTML. I think you need to put code is actually like code editor.
Yeah, actually, you're right. HTML would be it. So Peter, we can come back to, do you still have anything else in this demo? My last piece will be pretty short too, so we can come back to.
Let me do this with you looking at it at the same time.
Okay.
So this was, I wanted to make sure we touched on the query loop block, start blank, the template, walk through query loop block settings. We go through, there's so many of the settings that are like the width, items per page offset I showed, the filters, taxonomies. We didn't touch on that let me show you that, and then I'll hand it over to you, because that's
Okay.
something people
We
are
can
gonna
come back to anything you missed
Yeah.
too. Mine's gonna be pretty short too. I think the last piece I'm showing.
Okay, I'll show this and then I'll drop off. So if I'm back at my query loop and I'm not inheriting query from templates and I'm showing posts, but now I want to show, I want to set up my filters. So I open up the filters section and I go to taxonomy, and I can say, okay, so under the category plants, so CT plants, and now it's only showing me the posts that have plants. So this is how you would change your, you see I've got like destinations and things like that. If I refresh this now, I will only see plants because I am filtering my query loop block to only show the category of plants. So using the categories, using the tags, very powerful for now putting specific content in specific areas, which I think we'll spend a little bit of time going on. So let me hand it back over to you, and then
Okay.
we'll come.
Yep. Yeah, mine's gonna be pretty quick. I think mine's, and then grab the screen. Yeah, so there is a lot, like you said, and we definitely can jump into more of the settings. So this one is maybe a little obvious, but I think especially it trips up newcomers. And I'll talk about that in a second. So, what if you want to create a dedicated page on your site for blog posts? How can you do that? So again, I'll show this in a second, but by default, most themes in WordPress settings are set up to really display your latest blog post as your homepage. I mean, that's changed a bit for some more modern themes, but that was, because you think about it, kind of in the past, WordPress itself has kind of come from that blogging, audience. So it was assumed that, well, what you want on your homepage is your blog, but what if you don't? What if you want a homepage, and then later, let's say your business site, what if you want to have your news elsewhere? So how do you do that? So one of the first things is that in the settings, I'll show this in a second, in the WordPress dashboard, you can change that under reading. That's really where you control. You also in there, we'll look in a second too, that's where if you do want to keep your homepage as your blog post, that's where you can do some of the same query loop settings that Peter had shown. So that's where you can control like how many you display on that page, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where some of those settings are hidden. But why would you want to create a separate page for your blogs? It gives you the ability to have a static homepage instead. As I mentioned, let's say you're a business or an organization, maybe you want that information as your homepage, but you want the blog elsewhere. So it allows you to have that kind of separation. And we'll talk templates in a minute, because that was some of our chat that was going on. Because unfortunately, WordPress uses the word template like all over the place, so it's a little confusing. So but it's kind of good to know about it, because I think this trips people up too in the beginning. Definitely tripped me up when I was first learning WordPress about this template hierarchy and kind of how that may confuse you a little bit when you first create a blog page. But anyway, like I said, you can by using this query loop block, that allows you then to style your blog page however you like. And you also can create separate pages for custom post types, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just, we talk about posts, but we mean like custom post types, everything else. All right, so let me show you this real quick. So let's start off, again, back to my overused, definitely overused demo site. So I think right now this site, as I said, I'm using the 2021 theme. Yeah, 2021 theme. And I believe let me check the settings. So under settings, as I said, under reading, by default, this theme is set up, if you installed it, to say my homepage is going to be my latest posts. So what does that mean? I only have like 4 blog posts on the site. I should have loaded up a bit more, but that means, and never mind all this other stuff. This is me messing around with the site many times, but it's running a query loop, behind the scenes. There's not a block here, but that's what it's doing. So it's taking this is the title of the post, this is the featured image, this is et cetera, et cetera. So, and it's doing that for all my blog posts. And then this is my footer. So by default, a query loop is magically running behind the scenes. Where did it come from? Well, if you remember my earlier part of this presentation, in that index.php file, you saw that's where that query loop was. So this, a brief aside, I want people's heads ache. We actually talked about this a long time ago. We talked about child themes, but this is the infamous WordPress template hierarchy. But all, you know, just one thing to remember is that behind the scenes, WordPress is always trying to figure out the page that you're on, what WordPress template should apply to it. So in some ways, all roads lead to the index.php. All, you know, that's kind of the base, if you will, of basically everything else. Like in general, when your site first loads up, that's the first place, you know, it goes to is index.php. But what can be confusing though sometimes is like, how do I know that besides maybe memorizing this? It's a little hard to say when you're looking at a page, but fortunately, from debugging problems in the past, there is kind of a handy plugin I've used, which is called, I think it's called like show template, something like that, or is it show current template. So when you install this, it's basically a one-use kind of thing. You install it. The nice thing about it is when you go to a page like this one, it adds something to your admin bar. So users don't see this, just you'll see this. So you can see it's kind of cool, like what WordPress template is being applied right now to this page, and it's index.php. That's because there's nothing else being assigned to that to override that. So the way these templates work is the more specific you are, that's the template that gets used. So anyway, just bear with me for a second. So again, as I said, by default, that's what WordPress is doing. But let's say I want to create a news page to have my blog. I don't want it on my home page. So if I go back to my dashboard, you know, one of the first things you can do that would seem to make sense is, let's say I want to add a new page, right? I want to add a new page. I want to call it news. Here we go. I'm going to just publish it. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not even add a query loop to this yet. I just have a blank page out there called news. Well, kind of by the magic of templates that I talked about, is back here under settings reading, I can now say, well, I do have a static home page. That's one I created a long time ago, but I want my posts, you know, WordPress has this built in. I want my posts to all go to that news page I just created. And if I save it at this point, now again, by magic, let me go back to that page. There's a couple of ways I could do this. But if I look at that news page, you'll see one thing behind the scenes is if I'm looking at it from the admin screen, it tells me this is my post page. So there's something special about this. And if I view this page, voila, it looks like it kind of did before. So WordPress is using, once again, this index.php. Again, there's no query block here. This is a completely blank page, but that's one quick way to separate. If you're happy, again, if you're happy with the way that this looks, if your theme, because different themes will format your posts differently by default, that may be all you need to do. You don't even have to touch a query loop. You can just create a separate page. Again, why would you do this? Because now that I have a separate page, I've got my regular home page here, and I can also, under my dashboard, for example, I can add a menu item to, where is it? View all news. I can add this now to my menu. Let's move it up here so we can see it easily. And save. So if I go back to site, so now on my menu, I've got something called news. I can click to and see those. So that's with no query loop. So that's okay. But here's where things make it tricky. Let's say I do want to style this like what Peter was showing. I'm not going to do it as in depth as Peter did, but let's say I decide, okay, you know what, I really want to make that look better, so I'm going to add a query loop like he did. So I'm add a query loop in here. I'm going to just choose a pattern. I want to make it look more like, let's find something that looks different. This one's simple. So it's going to be kind of a simple title and list, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the tricky thing too, again, so this is the inherit query from template. So if I do an update at this point, you'll notice I don't have control over this right now. So what does this page look like? Well, lo and behold, it still looks like the old one. And that's where we make it frustrating. It's like, wait a minute, I added a query loop. It's because it's still using the index.php template. That template right now, that's the whole thing about that switch Peter showed. So it's saying, oh yeah, no, use the main, let me go back to this, use that main query from the template. It's only when I turn this off. Now, if I do an update again, now I look at this page and, oops, hold on. Oh, you know, I need to change, I know what I need to do. I also, this is the other part of this too, I also need to turn it off from reading too. That's why it's forcing it. So this, see, even I'm getting tripped up here. If I go back to reading, I can switch that off now and say, okay, just go back to nothing. So don't force that template to that page. just let that page do what it wants to do. So let me go back to that page one more time, my news page over here. And let me just make sure that query is looking okay. So it's query loop. Yeah, so it's just pulling. I'm not even gonna mess around with the query. I'm gonna leave it at its own default settings. So by default, what is it doing? It's pulling, by default, it is pulling however many, where is that setting? I'll just leave it, don't mess around.
Looking for how many?
Yeah, I was looking for like the whole thing of like where it says the number. It's on the loop level, right? Yeah, there it is. So items per page.
Yeah.
So I'm just leaving that as is. But once I do that, voila, now I'm finally, but here's the thing too, if you notice, what template is it using now? Now it's using my page template. It's not using that index.php. So, well, long-winded way of saying that. So this is you want to create a dedicated page. If you get tripped up and then you say, how come it's still showing me that it's not using my query loop? It's probably because what I showed, there's a setting way back in the beginning that didn't change.
Ray, can I piggyback on top of that?
Yeah.
So this does cause a lot of confusion when you go to reading and use those and what's a template and what's not. Different folks have the different things that they're used to. I like to, this just so that you know, I like to set up sort of there's a default page that might be called news or blog or whatever, where I might put in, set that up as for reading in case someone is go to it, but I don't use that. I don't use the templates. And even when I'm looking at block themes, full site editing, and those templates, like a template for homepage and all, I don't use those. I just create a new page.
Yeah.
Set that static page as my homepage, as opposed, because I see a lot of confusion what happens where somebody's going, wait a minute, do I have to edit my homepage template, or where's my homepage page? And
that's where this hierarchy is a little confusing, but ultimately this talks back to my Zoom is blocking it again, sorry. But down here, here again, this is the old world. So in some ways you almost have to, you kind of need to know about this a little bit when things go screwy, but yeah, your theme may have a home.php template, which has some styling rules, but when you're creating a specific page, like Ray's homepage, and I make that the homepage, that's really the styling that, for the most part, that's the structure and styling that gets applied. So yes, it's, again, templates are, unfortunately, the term gets thrown around a lot in WordPress too. I think that makes it a bit confusing. So anyway, that just to kind of show that quickly, so that's how you would, everything else in terms of styling this goes back to what Peter just showed. So if I wanted a prettier looking separate blog page, I would then go edit my query loop. I do all the page template stuff, but it kind of starts with what I showed first of creating a separate page, making sure that it's not accidentally still marked as a post page back in WordPress. All right, so let's, just for the sake of time, let's jump to, we can do this one together, I think, Peter.
Yep.
So alternatives and extensions to the query loop block. So just like, there's never, not just one way to do anything in WordPress, there's always 50 different ways. So even within WordPress core, there's multiple blocks that kind of may trip you up and say, isn't this a query loop? Well, it kind of is, but some of them are simpler versions of query loops. So there are a couple of blocks that maybe they're good enough for what you want. And maybe I can show a quick example of them, or if we have time after, I can show you them. But there's a couple other core blocks that look and kind of work like query loops. One is the posts list. That one really looks a lot like a query loop. So it's just another simple block, lets you display posts based on some parameters, kind of looks like query loop types of parameters. These other ones are a little bit more specialized. There's a calendar block, so to display your posts in a calendar format. And I think, let me look real quick here if I can find, where is the calendar? Here we go, calendar's new in 5.3. So this is what it'll look like. This is kind of neat. So imagine this in a sidebar. So if you want to display, I'm sorry, this might be too small for people. Imagine that. It's going to display your posts, but in a calendar to show you what day, if you're posting daily, it'll show what days you posted something. That's kind of neat. It's using the date parameter, I guess, on the post to do that. And then similarly, there's other ones, latest posts and archives too. Those are other kind of core blocks that are doing stuff that's kind of related to a query loop, but at least it's related to the posts, just a different way to display them.
Those go back to the beginning of WordPress widgets and putting things like that,
Yeah.
bar and all. So then those widgets were converted into blocks.
Yeah, so exactly. So in the past, some of these may still make a lot of sense for things like the sidebar. Although you could put a query loop in the sidebar as well. I think. Yeah, sure you can.
Anywhere.
It's a block, so exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing I didn't have time to show too, is that we show that example of I created a separate page for all of my blog posts, but let's say I just wanted to create it on my homepage. I wanted a section of my homepage where I just show the three latest blog posts. I would use a query loop for that. I would just limit it to three and do all that kind of stuff. So it's a block. You can use that block anywhere. Do you want to talk, Peter, about these other two, about the
Yeah,
block
I'll
plugins?
talk briefly about it, but following up on just what you said, that idea that you could put in a query loop on a home page with 3 items in 3 columns, and then do something like set the filter for those to be, for example, maybe you have a tag called featured, and I've done this, right? So now you can go in and say, these are the 3 things I want to feature on my homepage by simply going to your posts and changing or adding a tag is called featured, and that little section will just pull your most recent 3, or
And then you could have a big read more button that then goes to your blog archive
goes to your
page
blog.
or stuff, or
Exactly.
see more. Yeah, that goes to your blog archive page.
Lots of things we could do there. If there's no questions and we want to show any of that stuff, we certainly can. So block plugins or themes, there certainly are a lot of options here. We use Cadence. Cadence has different levels of query loop type blocks built into it. On the free version, you have like a posts plugin, which is a encapsulated kind of query loop block. It's actually ironically more limited. Came out earlier. Even things like portfolio carousels that pull from, they have a query loop built into them. In Cadence specifically, the Cadence Blocks Pro plugin, which is a paid plugin, has an advanced query loop plugin, which really gets into even greater levels and really ties into custom post types and things like that. But that's on the paid. Generate Blocks is a great a plugin for a variety of blocks. I can show this to you later if you want, but it has only a limited number of blocks, because the concept behind Generate Blocks is that all the other blocks are just built on smaller blocks: image, heading, type, paragraph, button, and things like that. So, but they also have a query loop block that they had before it went, as far as I know, before WordPress had it. Blocksy, which is a really good theme. For them, it's not a block plugin, but it's when you install Blocksy, now you will see a plugin, a query loop block that's specific to that theme, so that you can find these block plugins, query loop type things with different block plugins or packages. And then there's things like extending the existing one, and probably the main one there is the advanced query loop plugin, which adds additional functionality that even you find in query loop post selector, which would include other parameters that you can use to select your what you include and exclude from your query loop. Handy little things like just being able to put in this query loop, I want you to show this page, this page, this page, where you literally pick the pages that you want. I said you could use like a featured tag and just show those with these ways of extending the core. And what Advanced Query Loop plugin does is it adds additional features to what we've been showing you tonight, the core query loop block. So you get more features with it when you add.
Those are probably, I assume those kind of ones are probably also handier with custom post types, where again, a custom post type looks like a blog post, but it may not, you may want to treat it slightly differently than a blog post. Maybe those advanced ones will give you that more, more features to kind of work with custom post types too.
Yeah, and they'll have, like the Cadence Pro, you'll have more patterns built into it. You'll have a lot more design overrides and things like that if that's what you need, so that you can get really detailed, or you can just pick from a wider variety of pre-designed patterns, things like that.
I think that, I mean, it definitely, I mean, going back, we talked a lot about a lot of the blocks in general. I think the query loop block now is in a lot better shape than
Yes.
when at least when I first played with it and demoed it a while back. I forget when it first appeared. It was kind of rudimentary, that it worked, but it didn't. Now I think I trust it more, and I think it's the fact that you can put all different types of blocks inside of the loop, and it gives you more control over it, and those patterns too. I think just having more flexibility there, I think it's probably good enough for most people for most use cases. But then you're right, once you get beyond that a little bit,
Yeah, I say it's beyond good enough. I think it's really strong, and this ability to do like what I was doing literally, and why I encourage experimentation, because you're just placing blocks on a page versus going to PHP and
well, and yeah, and just the time that our two presentation things together, all this thing again that Peter was showing, like, you're putting in the hyperlink or that all the information. That's what you used to have to do in these template tags. So behind the scenes, the block is basically doing this. When you're dragging an author, like, give me the author's name of this blog post. Behind the scenes, it's probably calling, get the author, this method. You don't need to know the PHP, because now you're dragging and dropping something instead. So we've come a long way from what it used to be. So maybe just to kind of wrap up, and then we'll open up for questions and anything else people want to ask about. So we have our list of resources here. Let me stop sharing. So we'll send that out, but let me open it up to everyone now that I think our one person dropped off, or one unfriendly person dropped off. We can open it up to everybody. All right, so you can unmute yourselves as well too, but I'll bring this. So Karen has a question: can the core query block pull fields from a related custom post type? Ooh, I don't. That's a great question. No, I don't think so. So it's funny you say that, because that example I was showing the code of, this is like a lesson thing. It was more just like an online tutorial thing that I was doing, but that's exactly what it was. It was going through and saying, for this page, the idea was, it was like a university. So for this professor, let me then get all their associated courses and display that together on a page. So it's a query loop in a query loop.
yeah.
No, that's, I don't know, these advanced ones, maybe they can, but the core one, no.
I
Does
don't
that
think
make sense to you, Peter?
that's something like when I used to use Toolset a lot, and that would be the type of thing where you were relating fields to fields and go get this and do a sub loop.
That's I think the difficult part. It's context. Even coding it was a bit difficult, because you had to remember where you were, and then like it was a loop within a loop. So go get this, and then for that, go get this, the rest of the stuff. So it's a bit trickier.
Now it gives me another thing to look into, because I'm curious. Yeah.
Okay, Karen, so you're currently using Toolset, but rebuilding several sites.
Yeah, so Toolset's a great example of a tool that was so good, and they started doing the blocks, and then they went on a little bit of a hiatus, a sabbatical, or whatever, because they kind of got ahead of themselves and things kept changing. But then everything went past them, and a lot of people kind of jumped ship for those reasons. Like, there hasn't been any updates. Interestingly enough, since the beginning of the year, I'm seeing more things ramping up. And honestly, it still does some pretty great things, versus like if you had to do like faceted connecting, these different types of custom post types and faceted searches and things like that. That's been built into Toolset for a really long time. And I still have stuff in the old views that use older views versus blocks, and that's where it was the overlap that caused a lot of issues. But
yeah, and just to clarify for Gene too, so Gene's saying that for a post you can select more than one category, and then for a taxonomy field. Now this is a little bit different. So this is saying that This is really like parent-child
Yes.
hierarchies. And I believe you could do, so in custom post type UI, when you're creating custom post types, you can establish a hierarchy between different post types, again, like parent-child, you know,
I'll
or
tell you where I imagine that it could be, and I think this is with other types of query blocks, because I do one thing that I've done, and I've even chat GPT written code for it, but the power of passing parameters. Like, so, you know, when you open something that says go grab from this, and then the parameter of that says now in that query loop that's on that page, cycle through a bunch of stuff based on the parameter that I passed you know, for that page. So that's where you get like the difference between somebody who is a hardcore coder versus somebody who's really clever using what they can and kind of connect things to.
right. I think you're right. It's better than it was before, but it's still, there are still times where you may need to dive into code. So is anyone, so people are off mute too, I think yourself on mute, or you can keep putting in the chat. Like, have people played around with this query loop block? Any other things we missed or questions about it? Do you want to, maybe as people are thinking of things, Peter, do you want to show real quick? I don't have a site handy that has cadence on it. Can you show real quick the cadence
Yeah.
query loop block, just to kind of show the difference? Because yeah, that the only thing I remember from, I haven't looked at it in a while, is it was more the styling options that it gave you that were better to begin with, as you said, of being able to display them as like a portfolio or like a gallery or something.
You can see my screen.
Yep.
So I will go to plugins. And I will go to, oh, it needs an update. Watch this break this up.
Yeah. You can just do you have the free one, right? Or do you have the regular blocks in it?
Oh, so
You're updating.
if you want to see, you would want to see the pro. That's where.
Yeah, okay, you're right. Yeah.
So let me activate both. Okay, so they're both cadences activated. If I go to pages, and then I'll go to, I have a blank page set up in case this
Oh,
came
look
up.
at that. I knew.
Not that I've practiced this lately. But yeah, if we go to insert, and then under cadence blocks, this is where cadence has their different advanced blocks, and query loop advanced is the cadence one. So selecting a query loop, the way cadence works is when you create query loops, they get saved in a place, right? Almost like a custom post type itself. And then after you make some, you can just call up the ones that you made. So that's where like creating new had none, because I haven't made any for this site. And then one of the things that you'll see with the cadence ones is this is where you get into the filtering, right? So you can select filtering based on, so let's go with,
That's hilarious. Again, I have Cadence Pro. I have to go back and re-look at some of these things and say, oh yeah, so I don't need a plugin to do, because that thing you just showed is what, like the WP Facets plugin was very similar to doing that.
Exactly. So this is where, this is the, let's go over here to the, this is the whole, the search criteria. The loop card, right? So this is where now you have to create a card inside it. So it's actually a little bit more complicated in a lot of, because you're actually exposed to the layers. But say I just, you know, picked one of these versions. Let's go with this one, the simple card, and create that.
So their card is the equivalent of the group in the regular query, right? Like if you expand,
It's
the card on the left.
it's the equivalent of the post template.
The post template. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So select image. Now that's interesting. It wants to select.
Because you're on one of them.
Yeah.
So this query card is made up of an image and then a section with everything below it.
Right. But this is where I want it just to be the featured. Oh, no, dang. This is where you have to get used to. So if I go over here,
It's the barrels.
say it again.
See, if you want the featured image, click on the data stack.
I was going to say, because that's just saying put an image there. And I'm sure it just had to load because I'm on a slow server right here. But yeah, now you've got that same kind of equivalent thing where you're looking at a query card image. It's pulling this data is saying get the featured image. If I want it square, I'll change it to, this format. So this is similar. And it's also what's also weird is it feels like full site editing where you're like, okay, you're going to be saving the query, which is the search, the query card, which is the template, and the page itself. Because
It makes sense because then you could reuse them in other
that's
areas.
why.
Yeah.
So in one way, it's more complicated to use, but if you get proficient at this, it gives you far more power to be able to save time because you set up your cards the way you want them, and now you're just picking and choosing what you've created. So then,
which is kind of the equivalent, I guess, in the core of those patterns as well, too. That's basically what, as you said, kind of the cards. You basically save them as patterns.
but this is where
Really
you
nice though. Yeah, right out of the box, you get a nice like filter feature for it.
yeah, that's what kind of it's built in where there's the different search criteria and things like that. And you have other types of ways of doing the criteria. You're sorting. It's all a lot more functionality in the actual query loop itself, where you have your searching and your selecting and all. So
Did you have a spot, can you go back, edit the page again? When you were doing the query itself, it was taking posts. Where was the spot where you could change it to custom post type? Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you did pets instead, or you can mix them together. Yeah.
Yeah, let's see what happens with that. Cats and dogs living together.
It's a mad world. Oh, because you have the category, it's not showing them because you got to get rid of your reset your filter.
Oh. Sort by, let's see, it should be oldest.
I think it's hanging out to CT wildlife for some reason, that category.
Oh, because I did change it. There you go.
Yep.
So yeah, we're mixing and matching different a custom post type with a
So that's something different too, as we're talking about like this advanced one, because the WordPress core one, you have to select only one
right.
type.
Yeah. So you got all kinds of additional functionality. Now, one of the things that I would mention with Cadence again is if we when we go to a new page.
Sorry, and as Peter was doing this, if people have other questions, feel free to unmute. Sorry, this is what happens when we get together.
Yeah.
Like I find this stuff interesting too. So we're, hey, try this. Why don't you try that? Feel free to unmute yourself. You want us to look at something else? We have a question about what we're doing too. Sorry. You can, everyone can unmute themselves whenever you like. But yeah, they have the posts one as well too. Yeah, I remember, I think you just went by. So that's kind of the equivalent of that one, the post list and core, that block.
It's actually simpler, but it was the first way of doing this. So
Right.
Cadence post block came out before the query loop block in core. And then after the query loop block came out, then the posts, the advanced one from Cadence came out. But what's nice about the post block is, again, kind of keeps it simple, right? not too complicated to manage. But what you don't have, if I remember correctly, you don't have the blocks that you can move. You basically have to deal with the layout settings.
Right. It gives you styles, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're setting the things over here where you're choosing, what to show and what not to show.
Yeah.
Turn
Yeah.
off.
This one I think comes with the Kashare was asking us too. I think the posts block comes with the free
Yes,
cadence. It's the query one that comes with the paid.
it does. And quite honestly, for a lot of people, this might be the easiest way. But
It,
you have far fewer options, but it's simpler to manage the options that you
right.
have.
Yeah.
So
I found this one actually works really well. I did this on another site. This worked great, like on the homepage, like I talked about, because that was
yes,
like, it was nicely styled and everything. And
yeah,
yeah, simple is good. I agree.
yeah. But again, what would I use right now? It's been just really easy to use the core. Um, again, because if you're used to go to the blocks and say, here's my featured image, I want it here versus there. You're in that same mindset of editing with blocks versus using a block that then you have to go figure out which parameters and which styling you want to use, things like that.
And
But
we always say too, it's like the core blocks are the ones that are getting the most updates. They're free because they're built into WordPress. So if it does most of what you need, it's just more the styling. If people aren't comfortable with, let's say it doesn't do a particular styling thing that you want, you may have to jump out and do a little CSS or something around it. That may be a deal breaker for people though.
I can show, let me show something else. Well, if we got no questions and we're
Yeah, ask any question. Again, folks feel free to let us know. While we still have people here too, I know people may be dropping off shortly. Just a reminder too, that starting next month, we're back into, believe it or not, summer. It's officially summer. We're gonna get back into our summer school series. So for June, July, August, we're throwing away the slides, but we're gonna, obviously we'd love to get people's inputs on topics you're interested in or looking at your sites. We love doing that. It's been a while since we've had someone be willing to have us look at their site. We'll look at it for anything, performance, just general questions, etc. So
we'll have to check with some of the other meetup organizers, like Eagle, for example, like Eric, where you guys do you prompt for questions and you get questions. The way Eagle does it, Ray, is that he has a point where he gathers the questions and writes them down and then goes back and reviews them all. We just don't get questions like that to require that.
Our group is too shy. Everyone here is very shy.
We're just so good at explaining it, and there's no questions
Yeah.
needed at that point.
We lull them with our voices.
Well, I definitely do that. My wife is like, just talk to me so I can fall asleep. So. I wanted to show this. So I just activated the advanced query loop. So if I go to the query loop block, oh, it's just loading. I got to put more money behind this server. I don't want to, but I'm using it for way too many demos.
Well, that's where next time we'll play around with those the playground things we can.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I definitely want to play with you, figure out the way of setting up blueprints where we can, when we share something, we could just send a link out in the chat. People can click
and
pin up exactly what we're working on. It's taking forever.
Sounds like your server needs some lubricant.
It sure does.
Get the hamster wheel.
The other thing that I find too, and I just is there's so much that happens in the editor and in the browser that I often have lots of extensions and lots of tabs open, and that can make for
the one decent thing that Chrome added. I forget when it was. Are you using Chrome on this one?
Yes.
If you hover over the tab, it'll tell you at least how much memory is being used in each tab. So
Oh, what am I
I
hovering
think
over?
if you just hover over a tab, one of your browser tabs, I think it should tell you
Oh, yeah.
memory is being used. So it
Whoa!
adds up. Those megabytes add up over time.
Let's see, but the WordPress, the editor eats, right? Because it's got
Well, for people who've used page builders and who've had the misfortune of using Divi back in the day, that thing would just freeze up my browser quite a bit. It's gotten a bit better, but. So sorry, so back to context. So you were adding an advanced query loop, right?
Yeah. And
Okay.
now I'm looking for where I would under filters, order by. Here's another thing I found. Sometimes I have to almost like reset this part here.
Hmm.
See how that worked? I wasn't seeing the filters. And I
Yeah.
turned off the inherit query and back on. I turned it back on and off.
Yeah, that might be the UI was stuck.
And I got those filters back. It may be because I created this one. Oh. Huh, interesting. Okay.
What were you looking for?
Well, more options under filtering.
Yeah.
So I'll save a step here. I'll go to this one and query loop. Inherit, turn that off. What a pain that is, but necessary. Filters. Oh, I don't know. I have to look. So if you
Aren't those the only options for core though? That was the core query loop block. That you
exactly. But here, I'll show you the so WordPress.org plugins.
Oh, you added a plugin for extending.
Yeah,
maybe I missed it, Peter. Did you activate that plugin?
I may not have. I thought I actually did. I did because I had. But the advanced query loop. This is where I would have more order controls. Between dates. Post meta query, generate complicated post.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Better ways of searching. The include post is the one I like, where you pick what you want to show up. You know, which pages, doing that thing where you put a query loop like on the home page.
Right.
It's like this.
So it adds all this functionality to the core block.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, if you get it working before summer school, we can look at it again.
By the way, here's a bonus tip that I'm really liking. It is a extension called Web Highlights, and it allows me, if I highlight this, for example, anything, and I click here and I want to say highlight it. Well, I don't need that. It'll highlight it, but what's really good is if I go away and come back, it remembers it forever. So it's really useful for us when we're doing things, and I wanted to make sure I was highlighting certain things. And then you can do neat things where you actually tag them and you get a list of all the things that you've highlighted on so that's a neat little Chrome extension.
Very cool. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't see any questions.
Summer school, we'll do more. We'll do more with this. We'll keep going with this because there is a lot. I'm going to come back to this list and see what Yeah,
and summer school again, I think is a good time, as we mentioned earlier, about sending us suggestions of ideas. So obviously, we'd love to look at your sites.
Yep.
Be brave. Don't worry, we're a gentle bunch here. So, but outside of that, any little things or something, again, brush up on things we may have covered in the past. Like I didn't quite get that. That's what summer school is for. No shame there. Or new things you've kind of heard about, like last summer, I think was the summer of AI. So I was showing all these goofy AI things, which we can still continue to do because it keeps changing in WordPress. So little topics like that, I think, are probably a good thing to fit into summer. And then whatever is on your mind, definitely bring that up. So, so for tonight, I'm going to send out tomorrow sometime the recording. We'll send out the link to our Hartford WP website that has all the resources on it. If you think of questions afterwards too, especially if you haven't used the query loop before, a lot of times if you're seeing it for the first time and you're like, hey, I don't know how they did this, or you think of something later, reach out to us, again, either through Meetup or the private Facebook group, etc. And then again, think about stuff for the summer school session. So,
and I can't emphasize enough that what's great about like the query loop block is that you can start a new page that you're not going to put anywhere and experiment, and you can do so safely. It's just
exactly, yeah.
You can do some really advanced stuff in a really safe way because it's just blocks. There's no code to break your site.
Exactly. That's a good thing. So again, thanks everyone for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you. So next month we'll be back to our regular Tuesday schedule. So thanks for joining us on a different day. I had something yesterday, so I had to move it around, but we should be back to our normal Tuesday schedule next month. So thank you, everyone. Hope to see you all again next month. Happy Memorial Day too, coming up right around this weekend, if you can believe it. All right, take care. See everyone. Bye.